What was your takeaway, just as someone who reports this stuff and has seen many presidents before many microphones? What did you think of the way Terry Moran handled this interview?
Terrible.
Terrible.
He clearly has no experience in interviewing a president, was not really prepared for it, allowed himself to be bullied and silenced. And so I was not impressed by the interview at all. I think Donald Trump, again, scored major points by controlling exactly what happened. And may I say that it's a far cry from what a real presidential press conference is when you bring in top people in the media and you have them arrayed so they can ask the tough questions.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, but the presidential sit down. Look, I disagree with you. Like I thought, and not not dropping the gloves and disagreeing. I actually think that Moran did better than you think he did, but I don't think he did. There were flaws in that.
Let me tell you, there was fine. You have your point of view, but I can tell you, Michael, having been there and done that over many, many years, it was a weak interview. And I think the fact that the president didn't even really know who the guy was, said he didn't know who the guy was, didn't know anything about him. He's a lightweight. And if you're going to go in against the president of the United States, you have to have a heavyweight. And there are many others who could have been brought in who would have, I think, done a superior job. But do you understand? In a way, it doesn't matter because Donald Trump controls the situation, will not allow anyone to disagree with him, and makes his points. He has a very clear, precise way of dealing with these issues.
No, he does, and and I've done it before as well, and I think that and we talked about, I don't know if you were listening along, but we talked about interviewing someone in the Oval Office. The one-on-one is very different than a spray. It's very different than a gaggle. It's very different than any, even a presidential press conference, which he doesn't have very many of, or hasn't in this term. He had several of them when he was president, the first term. I just think that that he controls every room he's in. I think any president does. I just think that Moran approached him differently than I've seen a lot of even the most seasoned journalists do.
The Oval Office is very intimidating. I'll never forget sitting outside the Oval Office once with a fellow who said, "I'm going to go in and give the president holy hell." And he went in and said not a word. So you're right about that. I preferred the days when you had 3 network anchors interrogating a president at the same time, where there was a real depth. But with Donald Trump, it's never an interview. It's a monologue. He says what he wants to say. And the issue shouldn't even be this. Donald Trump has been violating the principles of American democracy so clearly, and that really didn't come up.
Well, that's true. I mean, and it's something that has been, I think, elusive for so much of media. I think in the very beginning of his first term as president, there was such good reporting about all the things he was doing. When none of it was sticking, it became more frustrating. And then he was able to turn the tables on the people that were doing it. And he created this whole idea of
some
fake
people.
news. Yeah.
Some people. Let me remind you that this country is pretty well divided, and you can see from the latest polls.
No, for sure, but enough people. I guess I should have said enough people. Not that. You're right. It's a real divide, and that's just not the voters either. I mean, not everybody who has an opinion on this votes.
He had a 41% rating in the polls from virtually every pollster this last week. That tells you something. When a president is at 41%. 101 days into his term, there's a problem.
Yeah, true. I absolutely 100% true. I think when you go to the content of what he was saying, and let's talk. I mean, I just one more thing on these interviews. There's when Meet the Press started, it was really meeting the press, right? The person would come in and there would be 3 people from the networks, as you said, and different, reporters from different places would ask a question, and they would really go a lot harder. People are handled now differently. People parse things. If a president made a mistake, told a lie, it would be the headline for days, right? And it would be one. It happens in such rapid fire with this president. What is, in your estimation, John, is not asking him questions at all and not having a press conference at all?
You're precisely
I mean
correct.
this seriously. Is that possibly a better way of proceeding with this.
No, look,
You
you're
can't do it as a
precisely
journalist.
correct in
Yeah.
your analysis. I have no disagreement with what you're saying, but it isn't the White House that should be establishing what the ground rules are. And let me point out to you, they've excluded the Associated Press, despite the fact that the AP has gotten a court order to go back in.
Right.
It's just the way Donald Trump operates, and we need to know the dysfunctionality of this presidency is extending to dealing with the media as well. Can you believe a White House press secretary like the one we have now? I mean, I can't. This is a
No.
far cry from Jim Haggerty or Bill Moyers or Pierre Salinger or even Ron Ziegler. I mean, it's just astounding to me. And the fact that the White House press room is now stacked so that people from Newsmax are asking questions while people from CBS, ABC, NBC, NPR are excluded. And by the way, you've got a president who's waging an unrelenting war against the media.
Yeah.
The executive producer of 60 Minutes, one of the most highly regarded people in the business, has been forced out. And the reason has to do with all of the internal machinations at CBS and who owns CBS. If the leadership of CBS, including Paulie and Murrow and the others that were alive today, they'd be rolling over in their graves. They wouldn't believe it. So my attitude is that we are going to have to wait for this storm to subside in order for a level of sanity to be restored.
Yeah, I agree, and maybe some adults will come in, as adults were there last time, and more adults will follow. The way he talks about Joe Biden too, and every single thing is Joe Biden's fault is
Well, you know it's
extraordinary.
Joe Biden's fault, right? You understand
Yeah.
that very clearly. I mean,
Right.
it's ridiculous. Once you've been president for 101 days, it's not your predecessor's fault. When the market tanks and you've imposed tariffs, that's not Joe Biden. That's Donald J. Trump. And people
Yeah.
need to understand he doesn't accept responsibility for anything unless
Yeah.
it's good news. And that's the simple reality.
I want to talk to you, John, about Project 2025 and move into some meat and potatoes here. The guy who ran Project 2025, Paul Daines, he's no longer part of it. Paul Daines, he had this whole plan of transition, the plan of policy. He now says that the president needs new lawyers. They need to fight these court battles in different ways because it's not going well in the courts. He said, if Roosevelt had the New Deal, this is what I would think of as Trump's real deal. This is deconstructing the administrative state and walking back a lot of this progressive architecture that had been built up by FDR. Now,
Yeah, but
historians of
excuse
every
me,
stripe.
you're using code words. There is a way the American
I'm
presidency operates. It's not progressive. It's a system that operates. And what you're seeing is a president who is overturning that system. And may I point out that there was a move by the Democrats in the House to investigate what's going on. And the vote was 216 to 208 because the Republicans held together. And so the Democrats are virtually impotent. And Speaker Johnson says, well, they have no right. They're not a majority. And all I can say is it's extremely distressing. It's a complete failure of Congress. And when the history of this administration is written, the most important single thing will be how the Republicans rolled over and played dead. And they will feel the wrath of the American people in the midterm elections. I'm convinced of it. And then the question will be, how will the Republican Party rebuild itself?
No question. And people will be talking about that now, at least for the next year and a half, and in the postmortem on whatever that midterm election is. But just for we're looking at the courts, and the Democrats have looked at the courts as their last bastion, their last hope until that election happens, because they don't have the votes in Congress, as you specifically pointed out, and they're not going to have the votes in Congress, it would seem. And not so much so that the Republicans pulled Elise Stefanik out of the UN ambassador's position just because they needed her vote in Congress. So what I'm asking is, this approach now to change their lawyers, basically, to go in and fight better in the courts. Does that mean that Project 2025 is alive and kicking in ways that the president has said it's not?
Well, let's be clear. Project 2025 was a real project. It had real agendas. They did tremendous work to make sure that when Donald Trump or a Republican was elected president, they would have in place marching orders to make sure they were able to accomplish what they wanted to do. That is remarkable. It's a great story, and it's a true story about how a group can move. The same thing applied with Heritage, because you can see their impact on the courts. So my answer is it depends on who your judge is and how well you present your argument. And the
Yeah.
simple truth is it's all going to boil down to the Supreme Court. And when it boils down to the Supreme Court, it will boil down to two people, Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice Roberts. They are the ones who ultimately will determine whether there's a 5-4 majority on the court to restrain presidential power. I've argued, and I talked about this prior to the election. Richard Nixon had a plan that was proposed. It was very much an administrative presidency. It failed because of Watergate. And if you read the book, The Plot That Failed, it's an outline for what Donald Trump's people were able to accomplish. And Nixon's people were unable to accomplish because of Watergate. I don't believe in a unitary presidency. I don't believe any branch of government should have the kind of power that this president has. And the Republicans are ceding to him. They are simply granting him that. And for the Republicans in Congress to roll over and play dead, which is what they're doing, is a disgrace. I'm hoping that in the end, there will be a comeuppance. And that is, you're already seeing it among some Republicans who are very restive. And if you took a look at the economic numbers this morning, you can see that there is now a growing concern about the approach Donald Trump is taking. And let me quickly point out the Canadian election yesterday was a powerful, or Monday rather, but we got the results yesterday, was a powerful repudiation of what Donald Trump is doing. We have turned a nation, one of the most friendly nations in the world, of the United States, into people who don't want to deal with us. And I don't say don't want to deal with the United States. The enemy is not the United States. You have a president of the United States who is asserting powers. Let me tell you something. In the Republican Party, once upon a time, the Republican Party favored free trade. It was Ronald Reagan who was the architect of the free trade agreement between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. He was very proud of that. And that was a Republican principle. You no longer have Republicans arguing for free trade. It's a complete repudiation of where the Republican Party has been historically in the last 50 years. So my attitude is that we only have two parties in this country, and the Democrats don't have the votes to stop the Republicans, and the Republicans evidently don't have the courage to stand up to Donald Trump. And all we can do now is hope that the damage can be minimized and that in the end, the courts will act accordingly, and that when it gets to the Supreme Court, and I can't wait for it to get to the Supreme Court, to know, and this is the sad thing, there are only two justices that matter, the Chief Justice and the Associate Justice, Amy Coney Barrett, because you know already where most of the court stands, whether you're a liberal or a conservative. So it'll be a 5-4 vote, and that will be the real question. Now, there's another question. Donald Trump has said he doesn't care what the courts say. He's going to do it his way. He believes he has that power. And that will be a real constitutional crisis between on the question of who is in charge. How important are the courts? And I think that is going to be a fascinating historical question as well.
Yeah, we're seeing that play out live right now, and we saw in the Moran interview as well, the way the president is, or his administration at least, defying the Supreme Court's ruling.
Yeah, and look what he's doing.
Up until now. Now they're trying to figure out.
He's conducting a purge, whether it is at the Kennedy Center, whether it is at the Holocaust Memorial Museum. No matter how you look at it, they're being very clear. They're going to purge their political enemies. Before the election, I have a very good friend who was a Trump supporter, and I was with him, and I said, he's planning a revenge campaign. He said, "Oh, John, you're delusional. There's not going to be a revenge campaign." And the thing is, That's precisely what we have now. Talk about Richard Nixon and enemies lists. Nixon did nothing compared to what is going on now. And the same thing applies with the media.
Right. He had lists. They were almost like they were his little hobby that he kept to himself. Now, there was anti-Semitism, and there were people that he kept out, but it wasn't like he was on this vindication tour and a revenge tour the way that Trump has. Revenge has has really underscored Trump's entire life. He was the kid from Queens who could never make it into Manhattan society, and for that reason, he's always had a score to settle with everybody, and he'll do it no matter what, whether it means telling the truth or not. And we've seen a lot of the not, and whether it means putting people down and cutting them out, and he does that all the time. And he rewards loyalty, and if he doesn't have loyalty, he pushes those who aren't with him away.
That's the
It
danger
has
of
such
Donald
a
Trump in the White House. That's the
yeah.
danger of Donald Trump in the White House. And we all better understand it. Look, let me just give you an example. Look what he's done to Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. Completely castrated him. Marco Rubio is this completely superfluous figure. Not since Richard Nixon did the same thing to Bill Rogers, who was Secretary of State, and let Henry Kissinger run with the ball. But Nixon controlled the ball. He controlled where it was going. And that is another thing about the administrative presidency. It is not departments of government that matter. It is what the president decides. Let me just say a word about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It's the most disgraceful thing I've ever seen. It's going to affect millions of us in terms of health and welfare in this country. And there's no doubt about that. Look at the measles epidemic growing completely out of hand. And the whole question of what has been cut in NIH. Do you understand that the people who are doing research on things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and all the rest, they're out. They're gone. Do you know that there is a mandate by Congress that the Congress was to produce a commission to examine the impact of global warming, and that what Donald Trump has done is to dismantle that whole process as well? I mean, I have no words to describe what I view as an abuse of power that has long-range implications for all of us. And it's not, and I want to be clear about this, it's not because I'm anti-Trump. I'm not anti-Trump. I'm anti what Trump is doing with the powers of the presidency, which need to be redefined and will be redefined, I hope, by future presidents. And may I say one other thing? You can attack Joe Biden for many things, but to blame Joe Biden for the economic condition which now exists because of Donald Trump's tariffs is the silliest damn thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I don't know that you could attack Joe Biden for many things. I guess you could attack any president for many things because so many things come across their desk. And I don't want to paint rosier pictures of Richard Nixon or some of the Trump's predecessors. That's not to shed a good light on them, but we say it. Even Richard Nixon, who had this, even who many people consider the worst U.S. president and someone who was a criminal, even he didn't do the same kind. They didn't operate the presidency in the same way.
And in the end, he allowed the Constitution to constrain him. Look, today is an anniversary. It's April 30th. On this date, 50 years ago, Saigon fell. Talk about a disgrace in American foreign policy. Talk about a mismanaged policy. But we examine it. We examine it carefully. We understand that there are mistakes made, and then what you do is you view them. What Donald Trump does is to kick anybody to the side with whom he does not agree. It's tragic.
Yeah. You also had in the Nixon Congress people in his own party who had backbone, and that made the difference as well.
Of course, you have the Republican leader in the House of Representatives was John Rhodes, and prior to John Rhodes, it was Jerry Ford. You had Republicans in the Senate who disagreed with him, including Hugh Scott, who was the Senate Republican leader. But you had, and Barry Goldwater, who was a force to be reckoned with. And by the way, I knew these people pretty well. I knew Barry Goldwater very well. And I can tell you, Barry Goldwater once told me about his meeting in the Oval Office with Richard Nixon a few days before Nixon's resignation. And Nixon looked at Goldwater and said, "Well, Barry, how many votes do I have in the Senate?" And Goldwater said, he looked right back at Nixon and said, "You have 6 votes at most, Mr. President, and I am not one of them." That is the kind of gumption that Republicans had because there was a loyalty. Donald Trump Jr. on the ellipse on January 6th made a statement that I think, unfortunately, has proven to be prophetic. He said, "It's no longer the Republican Party. This is the party of Donald Trump." And I think when you have a political party molded in the image of one person, it's very dangerous for America, period.
Yeah, I mean, and we're seeing that play out on the daily, as they say.
By the way, you've seen the articles of impeachment. There is a congressman from Michigan who just wrote 7 points or articles
Yeah,
of
Sri
impeachment.
Thanadar. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And I've looked at them. They're actually pretty well written. And in a normal world,
yeah,
they would get a real hearing. But there will be no hearing because Jim Jordan is the chairman of the uh, House Judiciary Committee, because the Republicans have all the power. And my argument is, whether or not it ever goes anywhere or not, at least there's a historical record of someone who sat down and really thoughtfully concluded the objections to Donald Trump. And I want to make clear,
yeah.
from my own position, my objection is not to Donald Trump as a human being. That's a whole other issue. My objection is to the policies that he's pursuing. I'm a scholar, so-called, of the American presidency and a scholar of the Republican Party. I've never seen such abuses in my life. I can only imagine if the leaders of the Republican Party are sitting around in heaven looking down on all of this, they must be absolutely horrified.
Let's talk a little bit before we let you go about this sort of going after Biden people and not being able to stop having Joe Biden, the Biden administration, everyone around him, and every enemy he's ever had live rent free in his head. The Trump administration has now dismissed former second gentleman Doug Emhoff from the board that oversees the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and other Biden appointees, but Doug Emhoff, the most prominent of them, because he was married to the former Vice President Kamala Harris. And then Emhoff turns around and says, I was informed of my removal from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Council. Emhoff is Jewish. He says, let me be clear, Holocaust remembrance and education should never be politicized. To turn one of the worst atrocities in history into a wedge issue is dangerous, and it dishonors the memory of 6 million Jews murdered by Nazis that this museum was created to preserve. No divisive political decision will ever shake my commitment to Holocaust remembrance and education, or to combating hate and anti-Semitism. I will continue to speak out, to educate, and to fight hate in all its forms, because silence is never an option, Emhoff added.
I agree with Doug Emhoff.
All I think, yeah, of course. I mean, have you no decency is all I can think of when I think of the McCarthy
But
hearings.
can I point out to you, the Holocaust Memorial Commission was always nonpartisan. Elie Wiesel, who was a liberal Democrat, was the chairman. Do you know who his vice chairman was? William Lowenberg, a conservative Republican from San Francisco, an old friend of mine, who was nominated and served because of Ronald Reagan. And there was no politics involved in those days. You simply were concerned about Holocaust education, Holocaust commemoration. And the other thing I found remarkably insulting is the statement that went along with this statement about only supporters of Israel will serve on the commission. Well, let me explain to you, all of these people are supporters of Israel. There's nobody left or right on that commission who is anti-Israel. It's absolutely ludicrous. And to politicize that also, I find to be ridiculous. So I have not talked. I have a very good friend.
It is.
I have a very good friend on the National Holocaust Memorial Commission, Sam Lauder, who is from San Francisco, who's been very active in Democratic politics. I tried to look it up before we came here, and I haven't talked to Sam. I don't know whether he's been fired or not. But he worked for Joe Biden when Joe Biden was a senator. He was his personal assistant. Is Sam, who going to be fired too? And by the way, Sam's mother and I was the chairman of the Holocaust Committee here in San Francisco for 26 years. And the staff person that I worked with very closely on that was Sam Lauder's mother, Naomi Lauder, who was active in Democratic politics, was close to all the key Democratic politicians here in town. And when I hear something like this, because their loyalty and love for America and their love and loyalty to support for the state of Israel, absolutely clear. And so this, to me, is just an example, again, of politicization. And may I point out to you, my friends in the gay, lesbian, and queer community, let me just quickly say, in the transgender community, let me point out what is happening at the Kennedy Center is a disgrace. Their whole program dealing with the question of human rights has been eliminated because of the president's determination to mold our thinking to his perspective. This is not what real education is, nor is it freedom of expression. And we need to understand that should scare every single American, liberal, conservative, doesn't matter whether you're pro-Trump or anti-Trump, pro-Biden or anti-Biden. It should scare us that this kind of authoritarian control is being exerted by a president of the United States on something that should be nonpartisan, neutral, completely objective. And that to me is also horrifying. And let me, as long as I'm at it, the Trump administration or Donald Trump using anti-Semitism as a lever to try to control academic freedom is, to me, the most appalling thing I've ever heard. Let me just explain to you very quickly and to your listeners. One of my dearest friends was the national president of the Israeli Student Organization, an Israeli studying at UC Berkeley on a student visa who spent a lot of time organizing for Israel on the campus, not only at Berkeley, but around the country. Can you imagine if my friend had been picked up and visa confiscated and removed because of his political expression? This is the kind of extreme action by this administration that I believe is absolutely intolerable. And I'm delighted to tell you a number of leading Jewish thinkers, people involved in the pro-Israel community, rabbis and others, have denounced what the Trump administration is doing. And it should be denounced. It should be denounced even by people who support Donald Trump, because do you understand, if the shoe was on the other foot, it could happen to you. And that was my point with my friend.
Yeah, that's part of it too, is that the people don't think that way enough in politics anymore. That sort of filibuster thinking. If we get rid of the filibuster, they're going to use that against us at one day, and so that we want to be able to protect that, and it can apply to so many things in Trump world right now and what's happening. I remember
in the House,
of course,
Do you remember? I mean, giving you a little history lesson, I don't like necessarily to do that, but we once had a Republican leader by the name of Joe Martin, who was Attleboro, Massachusetts. He led the Republicans for 20 years in the House of Representatives. His best friend was his Democratic counterpart, Sam Rayburn, the longest serving Speaker of the House of Representatives. And they would sit down and work out where they could do things on a bipartisan basis. And where they had to disagree, they'd fight. And that was fine. But there was a different spirit in those days, which really vanished with Newt Gingrich after the retirement of Bob Michael, who was from Illinois, who was the Republican leader. Newt Gingrich took over, and the whole thing changed. The whole complexion changed. And that, to me, is also a very tragic commentary on where we are in American politics. I enjoy my friends who are pro-Trump. When I had my show on KGO, I welcomed them. We had reasonable arguments and discussions. And I think that's what made what we did on KGO so unique. You don't have a forum like that today. And that's a real tragedy, because we should be able to agree or disagree agreeably. And I think that's something that is sorely lacking in the Trump administration.
Well, it is lacked probably since Newt Gingrich, and I don't think Bob Michael was a whole lot better, but he was a whole lot quieter, certainly.
No, Bob Michael was not a partisan. Bob Michael worked with Tip O'Neill, very similar to what Rayburn and Martin did, in order to make
they did work
Congress
together.
work.
Yeah,
and I think that's important. But can you imagine Hakeem Jeffries being invited to sit down with the Speaker of the House of Representatives, who we have now, Mr. Johnson, who is, to me, the exact antithesis of how Congress should work? Can you imagine shutting down an investigation of Donald Trump, simply the policies, on a partisan vote in the House of Representatives, 216 to 208? I mean, it's astounding. And nobody can say, even if you're a Trump supporter, that there aren't questions that should be asked about the way Trump is running his administration. And I think that also is a real tragedy. So.
And I'll add, I talked to Elie Wiesel when just as the museum was opening, I don't know, 92, 93, something like that. And he did say this was the most political thing. This was political history, because it got such bipartisan support since it was launched in 1980 to get, or 81 or whenever it was.
Yeah, that's when Wiesel took over. And then when Reagan became president, Bill Lowenberg was vice chairman. You had a Democrat and you had a Republican, and they worked together. Yeah. Here in San Francisco, by the way, one of the most liberal rabbis, Joseph Asher, who was himself a refugee from Germany, ended up in Australia, and then was the rabbi at Temple Emmanuel. He served on the Holocaust Commission too. I mean, these were people who may have had differing political views when it came to going to the ballot box, but when it came to Holocaust education, or it comes to performances at the Kennedy Center, are you looking at who is being canceled at the Kennedy Center? I mean,
the Kennedy Center is a totally different thing. I mean, the Kennedy Center is ludicrous for so many other reasons, because it's agenda driven as well.
Right, and that's exactly what Trump is trying to do now with the Holocaust Memorial Council.
Yeah, well, yeah, but it's also revenge. I mean, it's also saying I don't want Doug Emhoff there.
I agree.
I want to
It's a
I want to dig
combination of the
into
two. They're
Campbell.
not mutually exclusive. They are, in fact,
Yeah,
part of what is symptomatically wrong with the way Trump runs his government. And by the way, that's
yeah.
the other tragedy. It shouldn't be a Trump government. It should be a government that is involved with all the branches of power. So that's why, if I may, because I know we're coming to the end, I just want to point out what the Supreme Court does in this is going to be critical. Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice Roberts are the two justices on the court who hold the balance of power, because you know how Alito and Thompson Thomas are going to vote. And and you know how the liberals on the court are going to vote. So it's a very interesting mix, an interesting dynamic, and the future of our American system hangs on what the Supreme Court will do. Books are going to be written in the future about this, and in the meantime, you and I will have the opportunity to talk about it right here on the Mark Thompson program.
No question. And Mark will be back here tomorrow talking to everybody about all of this. So, John Rothmann, presidential historian, thank you so much for being on with me today as I keep the seat warm for Mark.
My pleasure, Michael. Hope to see you soon.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.